Year ago, in the late summer of 2024, Russia looked like it might finally score a decisive victory. Reports then suggested its forces were only days away from seizing Pokrovsk, a crucial Ukrainian stronghold in Donetsk. More than 12 months later, the city still remains under Ukrainian control. Even now, despite fielding many more troops than their adversaries, Russian forces in the Pokrovsk sector have repeatedly failed to make meaningful advances. Time and again, they have suffered humiliating setbacks, while Ukraine has shown remarkable resilience, able to fortify, defend, and hold on to strategically vital positions. The saga began in earnest during the summer of 2024. In the closing days of July and into early August, Russian units made a series of rapid gains, capturing villages and small settlements across central Donetsk, such as Progress and Lozovatska. Each gain in territory nudged them closer to Pokrovsk, sparking fears the city would soon fall. By mid-August, Sergei Dobryak, head of the Pokrovsk City Military Administration, ordered residents to evacuate. Russian forces were reported to be positioned barely over 10 kilometers from the city outskirts. They began striking crucial infrastructure and residential blocks, causing civilian casualties, and international media published grim dispatches about the unfolding crisis. Ukraine's commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrsky, warned the fighting in the Pokrovsk direction was the fiercest along the front, and President Volodymyr Zelensky publicly voiced his concern. At the time, Russian units were said to be concentrating the greatest numbers of personnel, weapons, and munition in the Pokrovsk direction. The outlook looked bleak. Russian troop strength in the area outnumbered Ukrainian defenders by roughly 4-1, about 20 regiments and brigades on the Russian side, roughly 40,000 soldiers versus around 6 Ukrainian brigades, some 12,000 troops in total. With each passing day, the Russians closed in. Even in the best-case forecast, Ukrainian defenders might only be able to slow the assault at the city limits, perhaps delaying but not preventing a takeover before the end of 2024. Then, unexpectedly, Russia's advance lost momentum and stalled. Days and weeks passed without any triumphant Kremlin announcement about Pokrovsk's capture. Tanks and armored columns failed to roll into the city and seize it outright. Instead, Russian commanders discovered Pokrovsk was far harder to take than anticipated. Though they managed to secure some surrounding areas and partially encircle the city, the decisive breakthrough never materialized. The year ended with Russia falling short of its objective. As 2020-25 began, the sector around Pokrovsk settled into a kind of stalemate. Russian incremental gains ground to a halt, and Ukraine even reclaimed some lost positions, stabilizing the front line for the first time in months. Unsurprisingly, Moscow's leadership was displeased by this reversal. In March, Russia intensified its push to capture the city, employing a full range of tactics: tanks, heavy artillery strikes, bombing runs on Pokrovsk and neighboring settlements, efforts to encircle supply lines by advancing on the nearby city of Dobropilya, and even sending saboteurs disguised as civilians to sow chaos within Pokrovsk. Those measures failed. Ukraine adapted and countered each tactic. Defenders used drones, minefields, and other measures to blunt armor. They launched a counteroffensive toward Dobropilya to isolate enemy units, and with help from local residents, they identified and neutralized infiltrators one by one. Facing continued setbacks, Russia escalated again. During its major summer offensive, Moscow amassed a truly massive grouping in the Pokrovsk area, reportedly around 110,000 personnel, over 500 tanks, nearly 700 armored fighting vehicles, more than 560 artillery pieces, and upwards of 180 multiple launch rocket systems of various calibers. The Kremlin appeared determined that failure was not an option. Vladimir Putin himself was reportedly desperate to capture Pokrovsk before high-profile talks with the President of the United States, apparently believing that announcing such a victory would demonstrate Russia was prevailing and would pressure Ukraine and its allies toward a negotiated settlement on Moscow's terms. Yet despite those aims, the city held through the summer and remained in Ukrainian hands. Fast forward to the present. Recent reports indicate Russian troops have at last reached the city's outskirts, and that street fighting is currently underway. Russian forces in the sector now outnumber Ukrainian defenders by roughly 8-1, yet gains remain limited and Ukraine still claims control of much of the city. On 28 October, President Zelensky noted that, despite the large Russian presence, Moscow had not achieved the planned result, another setback for the Kremlin. Even with superior numbers, Russia continues to suffer failures and heavy casualties. Ukrainian sources say roughly 2,200 Russian soldiers were captured in the region during the first half of this year alone, with many more wounded or killed amid poorly planned assaults. Moscow reportedly fields significantly more drones in the sector, perhaps 10 times Ukraine's numbers, and has again used sabotage tactics, dressing troops as civilians to slip through defensive lines. Additionally, Russia claims it controls egress routes from the city after seizing surrounding land. making safe evacuation of remaining civilians nearly impossible. Some 1,200 civilians are reported to remain in Pokrovsk, a tiny fraction of its pre-war population of more than 60,000, yet still many lives hang in the balance. Reports of Russian soldiers firing on evacuees have been documented, and analyses warn that Russian tactics have trapped civilians within the city, greatly raising the risk of indiscriminate harm. For now, Ukrainian forces continue to supply food, water, and medical aid to those trapped and strive to protect them. But Ukraine's grip on the city has begun to weaken. Small pockets of Russian forces are operating within the streets, and defenders are being dispatched to eliminate these intruders. The city's fate teeters on a knife edge. Regardless, Ukraine's prolonged defense and continued claim over large sections of Pokrovsk is itself a significant victory. Moscow had expected to seize the city months earlier and to leverage such a success to push further along Donetsk's so-called fortress belt towards places like Kramatorsk and Slovyansk and possibly closer to Kiev. Yet those ambitions have been frustrated. The Kremlin remains waiting for a victory announcement that has not come. Ukrainian commanders on the ground insist they will not abandon Pokrovsk. One anonymous major reported the city is being held for now and described the situation as stable chaos. He noted a buildup of roughly 200 to 250 Russian personnel on the city's southern flank and confirmed that the fighting has shifted to urban, close-quarters combat. Much of the earlier fighting took place on the outskirts, across fields and rural roads, where Ukrainian drones could operate freely and detect targets at distance. Now, battling in the streets means rubble, wrecked vehicles, and debris provide cover for both sides, changing the tactical picture. Here, Ukraine holds an advantage: local knowledge. Many Ukrainian troops have served in and around Pokrovsk and know its streets intimately, a home territory edge that can prolong resistance and buy time for reinforcements. Indeed, reinforcements are arriving. Assault squads, special forces, artillery, and UAV teams have been deployed to strengthen Pokrovsk's defenses, and drones and satellite imagery are being used to track enemy positions. Ukrainian leaders say they will hunt down Russian forces, hiding in basements and dug-in positions, and destroy them. Zelensky emphasizes 2 points. First, that Russia's fixation on Pokrovsk diverts forces from other front sectors, potentially creating opportunities for Ukrainian counterattacks elsewhere. And second, that international aid is proving decisive. Western weapons, supplies, and funding have bolstered Ukraine's ability to hold firm. While Russia has made some inroads, analysts such as the Institute for the Study of War caution there is no clear evidence Moscow's advances will cause an imminent collapse of Ukrainian positions in the Pokrovsk direction. The front line is fluid, with both sides making local gains and suffering losses. Ukrainian units have been reported conducting assaults in nearby areas like Donetsk to blunt Russian pressure and regain the initiative. If Ukraine receives sufficient reinforcements and supplies, it could yet mount a counterattack to clear remaining Russian elements and refortify its positions. If, instead, Pokrovsk falls, it would be a heavy blow for Ukraine, but not the end of the line. Other defensive strongpoints remain, and numerous Ukrainian brigades stand ready to resist further advances. For now, the story remains one of struggle and perseverance. Despite Moscow's repeated claims and sometimes exaggerated battlefield reporting, Russia has spent over a year trying to capture a single city and still has not done so. That reality speaks to both Ukraine's tenacity and to persistent problems within Russian planning and execution. Watch this report to see how Moscow's battlefield claims can be exposed as propaganda and to learn more about the ebb and flow of the fighting around Pokrovsk. Subscribe to our channel for ongoing coverage of this conflict and other global developments.